They say the worst kind of pain is the one served with a smile. I felt it that night, served in silence, handed to me with a knife and fork. It was a Friday night dinner. My son Julian had invited me over to what he called a simple family meal. His wife Karina had picked the wine. The table was already set when I arrived, too neatly arranged for what was supposed to be casual. Still, I had brought my homemade lemon meringue pie, the same one Julian used to beg me for when he was 12. That small act made me feel like I still had a place, like I still mattered. But by the end of that night, everything I believed about my family would be ripped apart and rearranged forever. I remember sitting quietly as Karina critiqued nearly everything I did. "Oh, you brought dessert? Julian's on keto, but thanks. I always forget. Your generation loves these old-school recipes. You still use paper napkins? That's so vintage." The comments weren't jokes. They weren't kind-hearted ribbing. They were deliberate, polished darts, dipped in condescension and flicked with a perfectly manicured finger. And Julian, my son, my only child, sat across from her, nodding, laughing along, sipping wine like he couldn't even see me shrinking across the table. I focused on Nathan, my 6-year-old grandson, who sat beside me, coloring a tiny dinosaur on his placemat. I asked about school, about his new backpack. I held on to that smile he gave me when he said, "Grandma, I missed you," like it was air. Because the rest of that room? It was suffocating. Then came the moment, the one that scorched itself into my memory. We were halfway through dinner, Karina swirling her glass of Sauvignon Blanc like she was the queen of some dull little kingdom. Out of nowhere, she laughed, tossed her blonde hair back and said, "Honestly, Julian, it's kind of sad. Some people just outlive their usefulness." I didn't flinch, not right away. I just stared at the linen napkin in my lap, clenched between my hands like it might stop them from shaking. I waited, prayed that Julian would say something, anything. He didn't, not a word. He looked at Karina, gave her that half smile he always used to smooth things over, and then went back to his plate. And that's when something inside me snapped, not loud, not angry. It was quiet, cold, clean. I picked up my wineglass. I took the silver dessert spoon beside me and gently tapped it against the rim. Ting, ting, ting. Karina raised her brow like I was an amusement. "Is there something you'd like to say, Elaine?" she asked, with that smugness that makes you wonder if she practiced it in the mirror. "Yes," I said, standing slowly, carefully. "Actually, there is. Since you're curious about what's useful, I thought maybe you'd like a tour." The room went still. Julian looked up, startled. Nathan looked curious. Karina smirked, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. She didn't understand what was coming. No one did. And honestly, neither did I. Not fully. Not until I took that first step from the dining room into the hallway, into the home I had built, and decided it was time they all remembered who they were sitting with. I wasn't just a guest. I wasn't just Julian's aging mother or Nathan's warm, cookie-making grandma. I was the foundation they all stood on, and I was about to show them, one room at a time. Before we walk through the rooms of that house, let me tell you what built it. Because it wasn't just wood and tile and fresh paint. It was scraped knees and second jobs, burnt dinners, overdue bills. It was a single woman carrying the weight of motherhood with one hand and a toolbox in the other. My name is Elaine Mercer. I'm 67 years old. I've been a widow for 15 of those years. I raised my son Julian alone after my husband, Darren, passed away when Julian was just 10. Heart attack, sudden. One day we were a trio, tight-knit, noisy, joyful, and the next it was me and Julian against the world. There was no inheritance, no safety net, just a mortgage, a kid who loved peanut butter and dinosaurs, and a mountain of grief we never really stopped climbing. So I rolled up my sleeves. I was an interior designer back then, small time. I took on whatever work I could find. Rented office spaces, staged homes, painted cabinets, and even cleaned my own job sites. I'd come home with aching feet and sawdust in my hair, but Julian never saw me complain. I wouldn't let him. Instead, I let him see me build. And that house we were in at dinner, that was mine. Every corner of it. Bought it when I was 38. Took me 12 years to pay it off. Early. I raised Julian in that house. Every birthday banner, every lost tooth, every scraped knee on the driveway, it happened there. I packed his lunches in that kitchen, tutored him through algebra on the living room floor. I cried in that laundry room the night he got accepted. Into college, and again when I drove him there. That boy was my purpose. He was my greatest work of art. But things started to shift when he met Karina. I'll admit it now. I was cautious. Karina was polished, educated, confident, from money. She didn't talk to me. She talked at me. She never outright insulted. Me? No. She was far too refined for that. But it was always in the pauses. The fake compliments. The way she looked past me when I spoke, like she was just waiting for her turn to talk. I tried. God, I tried. I hosted dinners, bought her thoughtful gifts, gave them space when they got married, never imposed. But slowly, Julian started to pull away. It began with fewer calls, then missed birthdays. Suddenly I had to text Karina to even reach him. At family events, I'd hear her making little jokes about how some people can't let go of their kids. Like motherhood was a flaw. Like my love for Julian made me clingy or inconvenient, and he let it happen. He stood beside her with that same blank expression he wore at the dinner table that night. I watched the boy I raised slowly mold himself into someone smaller, quieter, until he was almost unrecognizable. But even then, I stayed soft. I told myself he was adjusting. That marriage was hard, that he'd come back around, but nothing prepared me for the way they started treating my home. When they first moved in, during a rough patch in Karina's career, I said yes, without hesitation. Julian asked if they could stay for a year to save up for a down payment. I made up the guest room. I cleared closet space. I even gave them the larger bathroom. They stayed for 3 years. 3 years of her eye rolls. Her snide remarks about the dated kitchen. Her pushing me out of my own conversations. Her telling Nathan to go ask your father whenever he came to me. And Julian? He disappeared in plain sight. I started to feel like a ghost in the house I had given everything for. So that night, when she called me useless, it wasn't a cut. It was the last wound in 1,000 slow bleeds. I had tried kindness, silence, patience. But now, I would speak. Not with a fight, not with screams, but with facts. With bricks and deeds and rooms drenched in memory and sacrifice. I had one thing left she could never steal. The truth. And I was about to walk her through every inch of it. The irony of it all? The house they made me feel so small in was the one I had built piece by piece from broken dreams and determination. And yet, over time, I had become a stranger in it, an outsider peeking in through the glass of my own living room. Karina didn't need to raise her voice to assert control. She didn't need to move my furniture. She just replaced the atmosphere, bit by bit. She swapped out the curtains I'd sewn by hand for minimalist panels. My photo frames disappeared from the mantel, replaced by her glossy magazines and scented candles I could never breathe around. And Julian? He just let it happen. Worse, he handed her the keys, figuratively and literally. The fridge no longer had my post-it reminders for Nathan's allergy-safe snacks. My Sunday dinners were replaced by takeout containers and her no-carb orders. I once offered to cook for them after a long week. She smiled and said, "We've already eaten." They hadn't. They had dinner with friends. I heard the Uber pull up just after I'd finished setting the table. Still, I didn't argue. I told myself, this is temporary. It's still your home. Just give it time. But the truth was, I was slowly being erased from the place I had given them as a lifeline. There were moments I'd stand in the hallway and listen, hear them laugh behind closed doors. See Karina's designer heels left by the door I used to mop every Friday. Watch Julian pass me in the hall without noticing the way my shoulders slumped just a little more each week. Nathan, though, he saw me. That boy would run into my room on Saturday mornings just to snuggle in my bed. He'd ask for my stories, my old songs, my lemon tea. When Karina wasn't around, he'd say, "Grandma, I like your old pillows better. They smell like you." It broke me and filled me in the same breath. Then, one afternoon, I overheard something that left me trembling. Karina was on the phone in the kitchen. She didn't see me standing by the pantry. "Yes, it's a free ride for now," she said, laughing. "But once we buy our house, she'll either move into assisted living or, I don't know, maybe Julian can convince her to sell. No way I'm dragging her energy into our space." Our space. The house I had designed, paid off, and kept alive during storm after storm. That was the moment I knew. She didn't just see me as useless, she saw me as in the way. So when Julian invited me to join them for that Friday night, dinner, I knew something was off. He texted me the invite the night before, short, clipped, almost rehearsed. "Join us for dinner. Karina wants to celebrate something." Celebrate what? My erasure? Still, I went. I wore my blue silk blouse, the one Julian had picked out for me years ago on Mother's Day. I curled my hair. I even put on my wedding ring, though it hadn't fit quite right in years. I wanted to feel like me, not the ghost they had tried to make of me. The evening started out brittle. Tension hung in the air like fog. Karina greeted me with a cheek kiss and the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. The conversation was all surface: vacation plans, Julian's new project, Nathan's upcoming soccer match. Nothing real. No one asked about me. Not even when I mentioned that my friend Tanya had just had surgery. I could have said I was moving to Canada, and I doubt either of them would have noticed. Then the lemon meringue pie. I brought it in, proud and hopeful. Nathan squealed, "Grandma's pie!" But Karina cut him off with a sigh. "Nathan, you know that's too much sugar before bed. One bite, okay?" Julian nodded. Nathan's smile dimmed. I smiled through it, pretending it didn't feel like rejection. And then came the sentence, the one that changed everything. Karina placed her wine glass down, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "You know, Elaine, not everyone needs to cling to a house to feel important. Some people just outlive their usefulness." Julian said nothing. He reached for the wine. I watched his hand pass over mine like I wasn't even there. And that was it. The moment my silence died. The moment I remembered who I was, what I had done, and what I still owned. So I stood, picked up my glass. Ting, 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 and with the quiet dignity of a woman they'd forgotten how to respect, I said, "Since we're all here, maybe it's time I gave you a tour." You could have heard a pin drop when I said it. "A tour," I repeated, this time looking directly at Karina. "You seem curious about what I've contributed. Let me show you exactly how useless I've been." Julian looked up, startled, unsure if I was joking. Karina blinked once, her smile frozen in place like she couldn't decide whether to laugh or brace for impact. Nathan was the first to speak. "Are we going on an adventure?" he said with his usual wide-eyed innocence. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, offering him my hand, an important one. I didn't wait for them to follow. I turned toward the hallway and walked into the room nearest the front, the living room. They trailed behind me reluctantly, with Karina taking small, cautious steps like the floor might collapse under her. I stopped in the center of the room and turned to face them. "This couch," I began, running my hand along the armrest, "was bought the year Julian graduated high school. I had saved for months. It was the first piece of furniture I ever bought new. Not secondhand, not refurbished. I chose it because it was firm enough to last, but soft enough for comfort. Julian used to fall asleep right there during finals week." Julian glanced at the couch. His expression softened, just a little. I moved on. "See that coffee table? Built it myself. Had a client cancel on me last minute and couldn't afford a new one. So I sanded down 2 wooden doors from a salvage yard and varnished them by hand. Took 3 days. My hands were swollen for a week." I walked toward the kitchen, pausing in the doorway. "This kitchen has cooked over 5,000 meals. I counted once, during the pandemic when we were all locked in. That stove has seen midnight grilled cheeses after heartbreaks, birthday pancakes, and homemade chicken soup for every flu Julian ever had." Karina shifted. I didn't care. "You ever notice how the tile near the sink dips slightly?" I pointed down. "Julian dropped a pot of boiling pasta there in college. We laughed for 10 minutes after it shattered. I never fixed it, not because I couldn't, but because it reminded me of joy. We kept moving. I passed the hallway mirror. That mirror was a gift from my mother. She passed away before she could meet Nathan. I hung it here so I could see her face every morning before work, because on days when I wanted to give up, she reminded me who I came from. Karina wasn't smirking anymore. She was quiet. We stopped in Julian's old bedroom. It was now used for guests, but traces of him remained: old posters, a corner bookshelf, a desk that had once been his pride. He got into Stanford right here, opened the email while I was standing at the door with laundry. He screamed so loud I dropped the basket. I chuckled softly. We ate frozen pizza that night and cried on the carpet. Julian exhaled slowly. I didn't look at him yet. Finally, we walked to Nathan's nursery, the room I had repainted myself before they moved in. Soft blue walls, a rocking chair, in the corner. I rocked you here, I whispered to Nathan. Every night for the first month you were born, while your mom rested. I sang the same lullaby my mother sang to me. The chair was your father's, too. I never threw it away. Nathan grinned. I love this room. I know, sweet boy. And then we made our way to the final room, the study, my sanctuary, my memory bank. I opened the cabinet drawer slowly, pulling out a worn folder. This, I said, holding it carefully, is the deed. This house, still in my name, paid off 15 years ago. No mortgage, no loans, no cosigner, just me. I turned and looked Karina dead in the eye for the first time since she'd called me useless. You've walked through this house like a queen, but everything you touched, I built. Every wall you leaned against, every faucet you criticized, every dinner you rolled your eyes at, all of it exists because I refused to give up when life tried to chew me apart. Karina opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Julian stood beside her, hands in his pockets, ashamed. His face was pale. I looked down at the folder again and said, and this isn't just paper. It's my story, my sweat, my proof. And from this day forward, I won't allow either of you to rewrite it. Then I handed the folder to Nathan. Someday, this house will be yours. Because you see me, because you listen, because you love without conditions. Nathan held the folder like a treasure. And as the silence stretched on, I finally felt what I hadn't felt in years in that house: peace. No one spoke at first. Karina looked like she'd just swallowed broken glass, rigid, stunned, desperate to maintain control but not sure where to look. Julian's eyes flicked from me to the folder in Nathan's hands, then back again, as though he was finally seeing all the things he'd chosen to ignore. And Nathan, sweet Nathan, hugged the folder to his chest like it was something sacred. Like he understood, in his own small way, that what I'd handed him wasn't just a legal document, it was history, bloodline, a promise. I stepped to the side and sat down on the edge of the reading chair. My knees ached, but I didn't let it show. This wasn't a moment for weakness. This was the final stroke of a painting I'd spent my life creating. You've both walked through this house for years, I said quietly, as if it owed you something. As if I owed you something. And I stayed quiet. I let it go, again and again, because I believed family meant sacrifice. I believed my silence was keeping the peace. Karina's arms crossed over her chest, defensive now. I never, she started, but I held up my hand. You did. You may not have raised your voice, Karina. But every sigh, every insult buried in a smile, every backhanded compliment, you knew exactly what you were doing. And Julian? He looked up slowly. You let her. The weight of that sentence cracked something in the air. Julian looked like he'd been hit. His lips parted, but no words came out. His face was pale, his shoulders hunched like the weight he'd ignored had finally landed. I never wanted to be a burden, I said, my voice trembling now, but strong. But I won't be erased either. I won't be minimized in the home I built with my own hands. I didn't survive widowhood, debt, and decades of sacrifice to be called useless in my own dining room. A long pause. Then Karina, still trying to salvage her image, said, "This is just dramatic. You're acting like we were planning to steal from you." "No," I said calmly. "You weren't planning to steal. You just assumed it would all eventually be yours. That I'd disappear, fade out, go quietly into a nursing home while you picked out backsplash for a house you didn't pay for." Julian flinched. I stood again, slowly, and walked to the far wall of the study where the framed photos used to hang. I pulled out a box from under the desk and laid them out one by one. A picture of Julian at his first school play, me beside, him, beaming. A photo of Darren, my late husband, holding Julian on the front steps of this very house. One of Nathan in a blanket I crocheted by hand, sleeping in my lap. I didn't keep these hidden because I was sentimental. I kept them safe because I knew one day I'd have to remind you where you came from. Then I turned to Nathan. "When you're older, I want you to remember this house. I want you to know that it didn't fall from the sky. It was fought, for earned, cared for, inch by inch. And I want you to treat people, especially family, with more grace than what I was given." He nodded seriously. And in that small nod, I felt everything I needed to feel. Julian finally stepped forward, his voice rough. "Mom, I didn't know it had gotten this bad." I smiled sadly. "You didn't want to know." He opened his mouth, maybe to apologize, maybe to explain, but I didn't need it anymore. Apologies are only worth something when they come before the breaking point, not after. "I'm not asking you to choose sides," I told him. "I'm not asking for favors. I just want you to remember respect isn't optional, and if you can't give it, you'll have no place here. That includes both of you." The message was clear. I had drawn my line. They didn't yell, they didn't argue. The only sound was Nathan humming softly as he looked at the photos in the box. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the outsider. I felt like the owner, not just of the house, but of my story. The rest of that night passed in a fog of stiff silence and unspoken truths. Karina left the room first. She didn't slam the door or make a dramatic exit. She simply turned and walked away, like she was late for something that no longer included me. Julian stayed behind, lingering in the hallway outside the study, like a boy who wasn't sure whether he'd just been punished or rescued. I stayed seated in that chair, one hand resting on Nathan's as he flipped through the photos I'd laid out. His little finger traced the outline of a memory he wasn't alive for, but somehow felt connected to. He pointed at the old photo of his father in a school uniform and said, "That was Daddy?" He looked so happy. "He was," I said. He had a lot to be proud of. That night, they all stayed in their guest rooms, though I could hear Karina making heated phone calls through the wall. I didn't eavesdrop. I didn't need to. I already knew the shape of her fury. It was the kind that came from being exposed, not to strangers, but to the people you were hoping would never look too closely. The next morning, they left early. Julian gave me a hug that felt hesitant and foreign, like a man who had remembered the steps to a dance but no longer heard the music. He said, "We'll talk soon," but I didn't hold him to it. Karina didn't say a word. She walked past me, designer bag over her shoulder, sunglasses already on, as if even my hallway light was too much for her to face. Nathan waved from the car window as they backed out of the driveway. That was the last time I saw him for 2 weeks. And then, something surprising. Julian came back. Alone. No announcement, no phone call. Just one Tuesday morning, I opened the door to find him standing there in jeans and a hoodie, holding 2 coffees. "I figured," he said, "if you still drink it black with 1 sugar." I nodded. "I do." He didn't apologize the way I thought he would. Not at first. He didn't give me a speech about how he had seen the light or finally understood. Instead, he asked if he could sit on the old porch swing. Sat for almost an hour, watching the wind tickle the trees and the neighborhood kids chase each other on bikes. Then, very quietly, he said, "You were always enough. I just forgot what it looked like to have someone who gives everything and expects nothing." I didn't cry. Not then. But later, when I was alone, I let the tears fall. not for the pain, but for the release. Karina didn't come back. They eventually moved into a townhouse across town, closer to her new job and farther from the roots. I had once offered to share. Julian still visits, sometimes with Nathan, sometimes without. It's different now, polite, measured, but real. I've taken back my home. I repainted the kitchen cabinets, bright white with brass handles. I brought my framed photos out of storage and gave them the places of honor they once held. I even started hosting again, dinners with my sister Tanya, with old friends, with new neighbors who know me, not just as Julian's mom, but as Elaine. I began teaching again too. Interior design for retired women looking to rediscover their creativity. We call it Second Bloom. On our first session, I asked each woman to bring in something she thought no longer had value. An old lamp, a chipped vase, a worn chair. We spent weeks turning them into centerpieces, just like we did with ourselves. I kept the deed framed in my study, not because I needed to flaunt it, but because every time I see it, I remember that my worth doesn't need permission to exist. It's carved in every decision, every sacrifice, every silent moment I endured. And I didn't have to burn bridges to make that clear. I just had to open the right doors and close the wrong ones. So when people ask me if I forgave them, I say this. I didn't forgive what was never acknowledged, but I freed myself from the weight of waiting for it. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't loud, it's not cruel, it's not public. Sometimes the best revenge is a quiet woman, in her own home, standing tall in every room they tried to push her out of, still standing, still thriving, still hers.